Hello, welcome to the RELO Andes webinar this month. We're here, excited to see you here. Thanks for jumping in the comments and letting us know where you're joining from. I'm Kati Casto, I'm the English Language Specialist, and I'm joined with my colleague, Daniel Walsh. He's the English Language Fellow in Peru. Thanks for being here. Hello, welcome. Today we're talking all about designing student learning. So we'll launch into that topic once we get you in. Introduce yourself in the comments. Welcome. Hello from Buenos Aires. Hello from Bolivia. Nice to see you. Welcome from Peru. Love to see you joining live. Thanks for introducing yourself in the chat. Quick reminder that these webinars happen on the third Thursday of each month. So make sure that you're following along on Facebook, you're following the Regional English Language Office of the U.S. Embassy in Peru, and paying attention to when these webinars are coming up. We have a whole series coming up in these next months after this first one with Daniel. So make sure that you mark your calendars for the upcoming webinars. I see many people introducing yourselves in the comments. Please share where you're joining from. We love to see all different countries and regions of the world represented. Hello, welcome. I see teachers from Nicaragua. Welcome. Thanks for being here. Let us know that you're here in the comments. Good afternoon. Welcome, everyone. So we're going to start our conversation about designing student learning with a question posed to you all to respond in the comments. What's something you'd like to accomplish, maybe professionally or personally, by 2025? And how will you know that you've been successful? So I'll turn it over to you, Daniel, to introduce this question. I'll keep an eye out on the comments. Share in the comments how something you're looking to accomplish.
Yeah, thanks, Katie. So this question is designed just to get us thinking about more long-term goals and how what you would look for as far as indicators of success. So if you take a minute to think about anything that you would like to accomplish professionally or personally within the next couple of years, and then what one of the measures of your success would be, please add that to the chat. You could think about life in the area of work and possibly a promotion, a new job. You could think about the areas of finance. If you've been wanting to learn a particular skill, maybe learn how to play the guitar, learn how to knit, whatever the case might be. So I see Jenny has in the chat to finish a course on bilingualism. That's great. And what would be, Jenny, what would be an indication that you've been successful on the journey to accomplishing that goal? If you want to add that to the chat as well. Andrea has written to be more involved in an intersection at TESOL. That's a great professional goal. And Andrea, for you, what would be an indication that you've either accomplished that goal or that you're successfully working towards that goal? And we'll give people another minute or so to add any goals that they'd like to share. And welcome folks from Algeria.
Wow.
Angela has written, balance between my family and work in order to continue learning and sharing with others. That's a great goal, Angela. And what might be an indicator of success there for you? Haride, get the CPE certificate.
Hmm.
Katie, do you know what that is by any chance?
I don't know, CPE. What's that stand for,
Mm,
Haride?
yeah. Luz is here from Core in Cusco. We may be neighbors, Luz. I'm in Cusco as well. These are all great goals. This helps us to set the stage for thinking about long-term learning goals for students. Oh, Laurel, wow. You personally will have planted 100 or more trees. That's excellent. And your indicator of success is very quantifiable there, right? But maybe in the next year, you will have planted 50 of those. Yeah. Cambridge proficiency exam. Thank you.
Mm,
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah.
Oop.
Okay. All right. So with that idea of long-term goals in mind, let's turn a little bit more to the idea of kind of student learning and assessments. So what we'll explore today are the principles of backward design and summative assessments that reflect authentic projects. And on the next slide, we can see here a quote about understanding by design. Some folks also refer to this as backward planning. You might hear us use them interchangeably. Um, this quote I'll read aloud. UBD, or understanding by design, was developed in part to overcome a bad habit in lesson planning, losing sight of long-term aims and focusing only on a plan for each day or at most a week. So again, this is helping us to think more about long-term learning goals for students and thinking about what some of the evidence of that, of having reached that learning goal, what that evidence would look like for students. So on the next slide. So here we have the three stages, right? And typically we start with, or historically, we have started with stage three. And what understanding by design or backward planning urges us to do is to start with stage one, which is identifying the desired skills, the desired results. And those would be reflected in the big ideas we want students to walk away with, as well as the skills that we want them to develop. Secondly, we would determine acceptable evidence. What would be a reflection or an indicator that they've mastered or are on their way towards mastering those desired results? And that's what we might refer to as a summative assessment or a culminating assessment task. And finally, planning learning experiences and instruction that support students in reaching that goal that is more long-term in nature and connected to these big ideas and skills. So for today, we'll primarily focus on stages one and two. And then within stage three, you also might see embedded some formative assessments, which we'll address in an upcoming webinar. So with that, we'll hear a little bit more about stage one. And here's a couple questions that you might ask yourself as you're identifying the desired results, right? What should students know, understand, and be able to do? So this is connected to conceptual understanding, to content knowledge, and to the skills that are primarily associated with this unit of study. And finally, what is the end goal? What do you want students to walk away with, right? And one way that I've thought about this, I worked in New York City public schools for quite some time. And when I would work with teachers on this, you might know that there's an extensive metro or subway system in New York City. And something that I would encourage teachers to explore as they use this as a way to plan is by answering the following question. If you ran into your students on the subway 10 years from now, what is it that you would want them to say that they remember about your class? And I think that's a really significant way of thinking about like what will be significant about the time you spend together with students while you're studying a topic in depth. So that's stage one. And stage two, which we'll also hear a bit about in today's webinar, is we have the following two questions. How will we know if students have achieved the desired results? And how will we evaluate student performance, right? And embedded in the second question is the idea that students are performing something, right? That there is some type of authentic project in which they're engaging to that reflects the ways in which they're internalizing and transferring some of these long-term goals that you have in mind for them, right? So in other words, in what ways have they shown that they've mastered the content and the concepts? And in what ways have they demonstrated that they're able to perform the skills that are associated with the unit of study? And in stage three, and this stage we won't cover today, but as I said earlier, we could think about formative assessments being embedded within these learning experiences, right? And that's built into the activities that students are engaging with. Those activities could indeed reflect the ways in which young people or students, they don't have to be young people, the ways in which our students are beginning to demonstrate mastery of some of those understandings, knowledge, and skills. And with that, return back to this kind of planning progression as a reminder, right? That again, we're starting with the desired results, the big ideas and skills, and determining, and I think these two very much work hand in hand, right? And determining the acceptable evidence through a culminating task. So that will be our emphasis for today. And with that in mind, we're going to watch a clip of a video with a man by the name of Grant Wiggins. And he is known, I think, pretty internationally, definitely in the US because he is from the United States, known as one of the kind of architects of this understanding by design model. And we'll see him in like a face-to-face seminar, teacher, professional development session. And he is going to walk us through two ways of thinking about this idea of starting with long-term learning goals in mind. One of them is connected to social studies and the study of the Constitution. And the second is connected to mathematics, right? And we, of course, realize that most of you, or many of you, I don't know how to quantify that exactly, aren't teaching in content areas, but are teaching English. So the point of embedding these within the content areas is to give a demonstration of how we can begin with these longer term goals in mind, and then also having authentic projects that are reflections of having mastered those long-term goals or be on the way towards mastering those long-term goals. So we'll watch about 6 minutes of this video. And as you do so, if you wouldn't mind, Katie, could you go back to the previous slide? Is that too much trouble just for a minute? Yeah,
Yep.
just want to re-emphasize. Nope, same slide.
Oh,
I'm sorry.
this one. Oh, got it.
Yeah, just for the questions. Yeah. So as you look at these 6 minutes, if you wouldn't mind thinking about these two questions: how do these lessons address backward design or understanding by design principles? And secondly, how are they different from typical lessons? Let's take a moment to think about those two questions. And then, Katie, when you're ready, we'll go ahead and start the 6-minute clip.
Well, as a history teacher, U.S. history teacher, well, I want students to understand the Constitution and the three branches of government. That's not a goal. That's the content with a pronoun in front of it. What we've been saying all morning is, what do you want them to be able to do with it? What meanings and transfer do you want? This is not a goal. This is not a new idea. Ralph Tyler said this in 1938. He said it again in his book, The Principles of Curriculum Instruction, 1949. This is an old idea that you can't back in headings. You have to design backward from the outcomes you want with the use of content. This has huge implications for how you use Atlas Rubicon. Most maps stink because they're written backward from content, from performance goals, from understanding goals. Oh, okay, I think I get it. So here's my meaning goal. Well, that has an interesting implication because I probably won't start in the distant past. I might go from the present to the past a fair amount in my teaching of US history. Just because the book starts with Columbus and the Puritans doesn't mean our course should start there. This would immediately be clear if you were clear on these meaning goals. We're beginning with where the students are, with the debate that's in the air. We're beginning from a position of strength because the students have some knowledge. You start with the Puritans. Who the hell knows anything about the Puritans, and who cares? Transfer goals? Make sense? So let's have a more extended example. Math. Hey, what's fair? Middle school, 7th grade. Hey, what's fair? When you say to your parents, that's not fair, or when you say to me, that test wasn't fair, what do you mean? And is there any math involved in that judgment? That's the question we want to consider in this unit. So, T-chart, fair, not fair. Lots of discussion, lots of argument. Maybe some kid is thinking, what the hell does this have to do with mathematics? But we've hinted at it, and we're going to slowly but surely get there. All right, guys, you've talked about what's fair and what's not fair. Well, here is a case. Generalization applied to a particular case. And this is from Japan. There's a big debate at the school down the block about who won this race. And it's a big deal because there are talking points and pride and ego involved. And because we're such good math students, they've come to us for some assistance. You're looking at the place of finish of the 1-mile race run. This student came in first in the whole race. This student came in second. They're in a different class section. This student came in third, fourth, fifth, all the way down, 74 runners. And that the classes had different numbers of students in them. So what's a fair winner? Some kids may know how cross-country works. Some kids may not. Some kids may have other mental models from other activities or sports or experience, or they may not. Small group project, crucial. At least 2 different answers. That should harken back to some of what we said understanding is. And then let's argue it out. And so we have a whole makes their presentation, and it's interesting. What do you think? Next day we do a little jigsaw. Okay, count off in your group by 4 The ones go discuss this, the twos go discuss this, the threes go discuss this, the fours go discuss this. Do that for about 10 minutes. Now go back to your group as an expert in that question, and now see if you want to modify your answer to yesterday's running problem. And for that matter, whether you want to modify your original answer to what is fair. Well, guys, it turns out, day 3, that mathematicians have some tools that might be able to help us. On day 3, we opened the textbook, not day 1. And now we're going to do some fairly straight ahead work out of the book on measures of central tendency, and we can go even beyond this to other measures if it seems appropriate, but we want to make sure that there's some control acquisition of these terms. But is this where the unit ends? Well, no. It has to culminate in meaning and transfer. What do you think about this unit, and how would you compare it to a typical math unit? Be as specific as you can, small group conversation.
Great, thanks, Katie. We'll review the next couple of slides just to reemphasize the big takeaways from this, right? So in the social studies example, what we saw was that at the end of this study of the Constitution, the teacher wanted students to realize the following, right? That the Constitution is a solution based on compromise to real problems of balance and limits of power, and that the compromise has a long and sometimes bitter history, right? With many fights that are with us and will always be with us, right? So that's very different from understanding the 3 branches of government, for example, right? This represents the Constitution as a living document that is designed to help us deal with conflict, right? And to work out compromise. And the summative assessment, right, that represents transfer of this knowledge is design a school government, right? So what would a government look like in our school that also reflects this idea that there will be conflict and we need a way to resolve the conflict, right? And then secondly, with the math lesson, the teacher wanted students to leave understanding how central tendency, so this idea of mean, median, and mode, can help determine what is fair, right? And the task, which represents a transfer of that understanding, right, is propose and defend a fair grading system for use in our class, right? So really engaging students in some problem solving, right? Asking them, how should grades be calculated? And how is your system, the system that you develop to get a grade in our class, how is it more or less fair than the current system, right? So you can see how that's different from starting with a particular lesson in mind and thinking more about the long-term results, right? Long-term goals, and then something that would demonstrate students mastering or on the way to mastering those long-term goals. Right? So let's take a moment to pause and come back to the questions, which were, and Karina might be able to add these to the chat or to the comments. How do these lessons address backward design principles? Number 1. And number 2, how are they different from typical lessons? So I'll give folks a moment to respond to those. Katie, perhaps we could go back to that initial slide. Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much. So take a moment to look at and respond to these questions. We'll give folks a few minutes to respond. How do these lessons address backward design principles? And secondly, how are they different from typical lessons? So please add to the comments.
For me, I love thinking of the idea of transfer. Like that summarizes the summative idea for me. How do I want students to transfer this knowledge to other areas in real life circumstances, especially from English classrooms? How are they going to use what they're learning in that transfer and demonstrate it in that project or summative assessment?
Yeah, Laura's written in the comments, Laurel, excuse me, starting with a specific goal. That's an incredibly important component of this, right? And these are kind of larger goals, right? Not connected to a specific piece of content, right? Like understanding the three branches of government or being able to name the three branches of government. They're different. Some ways I've heard about this in the English classrooms is, for example, if teachers are working on a unit where students are studying the environment, for example, right? Students would then have to create brochures of local attractions, right? Both natural and built, right? And give descriptions of those as if they were written for a tourist, for example, right? So very kind of common kind of application of learning about and exploring local environments is representing that to people who don't know those things, right? Such that they have to use the language that they've been engaging with to demonstrate their understanding.
Mm.
I see a couple more. Jenny's added, it makes me think of setting more realistic and therefore meaningful goals for our students. I think I would underline meaningful, right? We want to start with something that engages students with big ideas, right? You focus on what you want your students to produce and what concepts you have them apply creatively. Yeah, that's a great way to think about Katie's idea of transfer, right? It's creative application, right? So application in new and novel situations, right? I think that's a great way to think about it. And reaching the desired result, right? So what does that desired result look like, and how are the desired results reflected in that long-term project, right? You have to make sure that students are able to show through that project the desired results, right? Otherwise, we have a conflict or a misalignment, right? We want to make sure that those things are working hand in hand. Yeah. Great. Thank you for those comments. Really appreciate it. And so what's next? A couple of things. One, we want to remind you, think about this idea of big ideas, right? And of transfer, right? Or of creatively applying, as someone added to the chat. And secondly, since we've been talking about summative assessments that reflect those long-term goals, they have to be able to demonstrate, right, the transfer of skills, knowledge, and understanding, right? And we saw two examples of that with the one with social studies, one with math, right? The summative assessment was design a student government, right, that takes into account the big principles of conflict, right? And we need a way to manage conflict that's part of the purpose of constitutions and government, right? And secondly, in the math example, propose a way that you should be given a grade in your class, right? How should it be calculated, right? Is it fair, right? So this idea of the ways in which math can contribute to ideas of, or can embody ideas of fairness and help students to answer the question, what's fair, right? And as we know, young people, middle school and high school students are particularly concerned about issues of fairness and what's fair, right? So that said, as you think about these things, two questions for us to explore, and we will give you a few minutes to add to the chat here. What's the next step that you could take, given some of what you've heard here? And then secondly, what questions do you have? So we'll give you a couple of minutes to add to the chat with a step you might take and or a question that you have. And Katie and I will do our best to answer your questions.
Definitely. I'm reflecting on our webinar from January from last month and thinking about planning ahead, some tips for looking ahead for this school year that's about to start, or maybe it's started already. But a next step for me could be creating space to reflect on those big goals based on what I know about my students for this year, drafting out some of those big goals so that I can work backwards, thinking through the end results, that demonstration of knowledge. What do I want my students to carry with them to remember about this course years in advance, and start drafting some big goals for students for this year. Feel free to share your next steps or your questions in the comments. Another next step for teachers joining live on this webinar might be to join next month's webinar, where we'll talk about formative assessment, a great follow-up to this conversation around summative assessment. So that could be a next step for you.
I do, and just to underscore your idea a bit, Katie, I like the idea of combining reflection with big goals, right? So if at least here in Peru, students still are on summer vacacionales, whether that's true for others depends upon where in the world they're joining from. But thinking about, yeah, what do I really want students to get from this? You could just start with a particular unit of study and thinking what the big goal is there and just jotting things down just as a place to start. Jenny's added something similar to the comments. Go back and reformulate goals for the next part of the semester. It's a great way to also combine kind of reflection and planning and think more about kind of the greater purpose of the time that you're spending with your students and that students are spending together. Use what you learned from the summit to redesign future classes. That's great. Yeah, so looking back perhaps at your first semester summative assessments, right? Looking at student work, what does that tell you about the instruction, right? What does that tell you about whether students reach the long-term goals, and what are some changes you might make to your instructions so that students can better represent those long-term goals in their projects. And maybe the project needs to be tweaked a little bit so there's better alignment between the long-term goals and the summative assessment, right? It's great. Anything else from the chat that you're seeing, Katie, to underscore?
Let's see. Oh, I see Edward's comment. An appropriate feedback and check what we've already achieved and what we can redo. Definitely. Yeah, it's clear how reflection can really play in here. Thinking about those summative assessments and how we might modify them or differentiate them based on what we know, what we've done in the past, what our experience has been, and also how our students have learned. I like to think about, oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, finish, please.
No, I was just going to say, I like to think about summative assessments as option boards sometimes too. Sometimes we get in this rut of our summative assessments always looking the same, students producing the same thing or transferring knowledge in the same way, but providing options in our lesson planning for ways that students can express that transfer of skills is another potential next step for some teachers.
Yeah, how can you incorporate the arts, for example, in that expression of understanding? I've had students write and record podcasts, which can be a great group project as well. So thinking about the variety of options to express their knowledge and understanding and skills is critical, right? And you can also think about the ways in which developing skills with technology can then be reflected in the summative assessments. So that's a great way to think about it. And I would just add that Laurel's added design. And yeah, this is really a design. What we've shared with you is a methodology for designing learning very deliberately, right? That we think about the long-term goal and design backwards from there. And that's kind of where the brilliance and challenge of teaching comes in. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. There's a great question for you in the chat. It says, do we need to share indicators of performance in the summative assessment?
I always think rubrics are a great idea, and having the performance indicators shared publicly with students, right, at the beginning of the unit, so they know what's expected of them. They can then engage in self-assessment along the way and at the end, and they can also engage in peer assessment, which I think is incredibly valuable as well. So I do think that having, a set of about 4, performance indicators is really key. And I say 4 because otherwise it becomes too much for both teachers and students, right? So you really have to think deeply about what is going to reflect, the fact that they've reached these long-term goals. And you might want to think about it as knowledge, understanding, and skills, right? And have a performance indicator for each of those. Perhaps with understanding, you might need 2 because they're big ideas. Perhaps there's a fair amount of content and you might need 2 that are connected to knowledge. So it would vary depending upon the unit, but we just offer that as some general guidance.
That's great advice.
Okay, Katie, you want to move towards wrap up here?
Yeah, I don't see any other questions in the comments. Thanks for sharing your ideas and your questions through the chat box. It really helps to see your engagement. And we'll share with you what's coming up. So, tomorrow, Friday the 17th at 2 p.m. Lima time, we'll be hosting the post webinar discussion all about this topic. So, if you are able to join, you're welcome to join. Bring your thoughts, your ideas, your big goals, your units, and Daniel and I will be there to talk through them with you. That's tomorrow. And of course, make sure that you mark your calendars for next month, Thursday, March 16th at 2 p.m. We'll be talking about formative assessments, and Duff will be here joining me for that webinar. So thanks, everyone. And thank you, Daniel, for sharing your expertise on this subject with us. Thanks for being here, and we'll see you, if not tomorrow, next month.
Thanks, everyone.